Korean mobster fired the cleaning lady for a mistake, and what her children did next changed everything. On a gray morning of October 15th, 2022, in the quiet district of Hampyeong, something unfolded before dozens of neighbors. 2 children knelt on the wet street, begging the woman who cared for them not to leave. Nothing in that household's reserved routine hinted at the emotional collapse that would erupt moments later. But the turning point came the moment one child lost strength and fell, revealing a bond far deeper than anyone believed existed inside that guarded home. Since that day, one question lingers. What was truly happening behind those closed doors? Follow the channel, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. The rain fell softly over Hampyeong that Thursday morning, each droplet tapping against the windows of the Han family mansion like tiny, insistent fingers. Inside the servants' quarters, Maurice's hands trembled as she folded the last of her belongings into a worn canvas bag, the same bag she'd carried when she first arrived at this house 3 years ago, full of hope and gratitude. She was 52 years old, too old to start over, too tired to pretend this didn't break something deep inside her chest. The marble floors of the main hallway gleamed under the soft lighting as Maurice made her way toward the entrance, her footsteps almost silent despite the weight pressing down on her shoulders. The house smelled of expensive cedar wood and the faint trace of this morning's fresh sukot from the kitchen, scents that had become home to her, even when she knew she was merely passing through someone else's life. Do-kyun stood near the grand staircase, his posture rigid as always, hands clasped behind his back. His tailored charcoal suit fit him perfectly, every line sharp and deliberate. But this morning, something was different. His jaw was set too tightly. His eyes avoided hers with an intensity that felt worse than anger. "The decision has been made," he said, his voice low and measured, each word falling like a stone into still water. "I appreciate your service to this household, but we can no longer continue this arrangement." Maurice nodded slowly, though her vision blurred at the edges. She'd known this was coming ever since the incident 2 days ago. The shattered porcelain vase, a family heirloom from Do-kyun's grandmother, reduced to glittering fragments on the living room floor. It had been an accident, a stumble while dusting, but accidents didn't matter in houses like these. Mistakes were currency, and she'd just spent all of hers. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Yu Hua-jin standing in the doorway to the dining room, one hand absently adjusting the pearl necklace at her throat. Once, twice, 3 times. The gesture looked casual, but Maurice had learned to read the small tells of this family. Hua-jin only touched her necklace like that when she was deeply uncomfortable, when something threatened the carefully maintained order of her world. The sound of small feet racing down the hallway shattered the heavy silence. "Marie-Ceci! Marie-Ceci, wait!" 7-year-old twins Yesol and Yeha burst into the foyer, their matching pink hanbok-inspired dresses fluttering as they ran. Yesol's eyes were already red-rimmed, tears streaming down her round cheeks. Yeha clutched a drawing in her small fist, a crayon picture of Maurice standing between them, all 3 figures holding hands under a smiling sun. "Please don't leave us," Yesol sobbed, wrapping her arms around Maurice's waist with desperate strength. "We'll be better, we promise. We'll clean our rooms every day. We won't spill anything ever again," Yeha added, her voice cracking as she pressed the drawing into Maurice's trembling hand. "Please, you can't go. You're the only person who listens to us." Those words, "You're the only person who listens to us," hung in the air like an accusation nobody wanted to acknowledge. Maurice knelt down, her knees protesting against the cold marble, and pulled both girls close. She could feel their small bodies shaking against hers, could smell the strawberry shampoo from their morning bath. "My sweet girls," she whispered in Korean, her accent thick with emotion. "This isn't about you. You've done nothing wrong. Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult choices." "Yesol, Yeha, come here now." Do-kyun's voice cut through the moment, firm but not unkind. Neither girl moved. Outside, Maurice could see faces gathering near the front gate, neighbors pretending to walk their dogs, ajumas pausing their morning routines to watch the scene unfolding in the Han family's grand entrance. In a neighborhood like this, where reputation was everything and privacy was a luxury constantly under siege, even the smallest disruption became immediate entertainment. Mrs. Kang from 3 houses down stood with her phone raised, not even pretending she wasn't recording. Do-kyun's jaw tightened further as he noticed the audience. "Girls," I said, "come here." "No," Yesol's scream was raw, primal. "You can't make her leave. She reads us stories every night. She helps us with our homework. She knows when we're sad even when we don't say anything." Hua-jin finally moved, crossing the foyer with quick, measured steps. "That's enough. Both of you are making a scene. This is inappropriate behavior for—" "I don't care!" Yeha shouted back, her usually quiet voice suddenly fierce. "You're always on your phone. You never ask us about our day. Maurice is the one who—" The slap of reality hit harder than any hand could. Hua-jin's face went pale, then flushed crimson. Her hand flew back to her necklace, adjusting it compulsively now, over and over. The neighbors leaned in closer, whispers multiplying like ripples across a pond. Maurice stood slowly, gently guiding the girls toward their parents despite their resistance. "Please," she said quietly, looking directly at Do-kyun for the first time since this morning began. "Let me leave with dignity, for their sake." Something flickered across Do-kyun's expression. Regret, perhaps, or the ghost of second thoughts he couldn't afford to entertain. But he nodded, stepping aside to let her pass. Maurice picked up her bag and walked toward the front door, each step feeling like she was leaving behind pieces of her heart on that gleaming marble floor. Behind her, she could hear Yesol's sobs growing more desperate, could feel the weight of every eye watching from beyond the gate. She stepped onto the wet pavement, rain immediately soaking through her thin jacket, and then, a sound that would replay in her nightmares for weeks to come. A thud, heavy, and final. Maurice spun around to see Yesol collapsed on the foyer floor, her small body limp, one arm stretched toward the door as if she'd been trying to reach Maurice even as consciousness left her. "Yesol!" Hua-jin's scream shattered the morning. Chaos erupted. Do-kyun swept his daughter into his arms, shouting for someone to call an ambulance. Yeha stood frozen, her face drained of all color. Neighbors rushed through the gate now, abandoning all pretense of distance. Cell phones capturing every second of the Han family's private catastrophe, becoming public spectacle. Mrs. Kang's video was already uploading before the ambulance arrived, the caption writing itself. "Hampyeong's most respected family falls apart. Child collapses as housekeeper is thrown out." Maurice stood in the rain, bag still clutched in her shaking hands, watching the scene unfold through a blur of tears and droplets. The girl she'd cared for, loved like her own, crumpled because of choices made by adults who should have known better, because of her. The ambulance siren grew louder in the distance, but all Maurice could hear was Yesol's voice echoing in her memory. "You're the only person who listens to us." And she'd walked away anyway. The reputation of the Han family, built over generations, maintained through careful control and strategic appearances, was crumbling in real time, filmed from a dozen angles, spreading through Hampyeong's social networks like wildfire through dry grass. But in that moment, as Maurice watched Do-kyun carry his unconscious daughter to the waiting ambulance, she realized something far more devastating than ruined reputations. Sometimes the people we love most become collateral damage in wars we never chose to fight. The community hospital in Hampyeong smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sterile, unforgiving glow that made everyone look slightly ill. Maurice sat in the waiting area, her damp clothes clinging to her skin, her canvas bag resting at her feet like a faithful dog that didn't understand it had been abandoned. She hadn't been invited to come, but when the ambulance doors closed with Yesol inside, Maurice's feet had simply followed, running through puddles and rain until she reached the hospital entrance. No one had stopped her. No one had acknowledged her presence either. Through the small window in the emergency room door, she could see Do-kyun standing rigid beside the examination table, one hand resting protectively on his daughter's small shoulder. Yeha clung to her mother's arm, face buried in the expensive fabric of Hua-jin's coat. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and tired hands, moved efficiently around Yesol, checking vitals, asking questions in that calm professional voice that somehow made everything feel both safer and more terrifying. Maurice couldn't hear the words, but she could read the concern etched into every line of the doctor's face. The waiting room door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air and the sharp voice of Hua-jin. "I need to make a call," she announced to no one in particular, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor with aggressive precision. She moved to the corner, phone already pressed to her ear, speaking in rapid, clipped sentences that carried despite her obvious attempts at privacy. "Yes, I know. No, I understand, but do you realize what's happening? The video is everywhere. Yes, everywhere. Mrs. Kang posted it in the neighborhood group, and now it's spreading to other communities. My husband's business associates will see this. His mother will see this. Maurice watched as Hua-jin's free hand moved to her necklace, adjusting it once, twice, 3 times. The pearls caught the fluorescent light, gleaming like small, perfect accusations. People are saying we're cruel. They're saying we threw out a helpless woman while our children suffered. Do you understand what this means for our standing? For Do-kyun's reputation? Not once did Hua-jin mention Ye-sol's condition. Not once did she ask if her daughter was okay. The realization settled into Maurice's chest, like a stone dropping into deep water. This wasn't about the girls at all. This was about image, about control, about maintaining the carefully constructed facade of the perfect Hampyeong family that had just cracked wide open for everyone to see. 15 minutes later, Do-kyun emerged from the emergency room, his expression unreadable, but his shoulders slightly slumped in a way Maurice had never seen before. He held his phone, screen illuminated with the infamous video that had already been viewed over 3,000 times in their small neighborhood network. Maurice watched as he played it, his thumb hovering over the screen. She could see it from where she sat. The angle captured everything. Ye-sol's desperate pleas, the cold dismissal, the child's collapse. Mrs. Kang had even managed to catch Maurice's face in the rain, tears mixing with raindrops, looking every bit the tragic victim of heartless wealth. "Sir," a young nurse approached Do-kyun with a clipboard. "The doctor would like to speak with you about Ye-sol's emotional state. She's asking some questions about the home environment that we need to document." Something in Do-kyun's face shifted. Not quite fear, but close enough to recognize its cousin. Hwa-jin reappeared, having finished her phone call, and immediately intercepted the conversation. "What kind of questions? Is this standard procedure, Mrs. Han? When a child experiences this level of emotional distress resulting in physical collapse, we're required to ensure the home situation is—" "Our home situation is fine," Hwa-jin snapped, then seemed to catch herself, softening her tone with visible effort. "We're a respectable family. This was simply an unfortunate misunderstanding that got out of hand." The nurse's expression remained professionally neutral, but Maurice saw the slight tightening around her eyes. She'd heard this before. Wealthy families explaining away concerning signs, wrapping problems in expensive words and social status. "The doctor still needs to speak with you," the nurse said firmly, then turned and walked back through the emergency room doors. In the silence that followed, Do-kyun's phone buzzed, then again, and again. Messages flooding in, from business partners, from his mother, from the country club board, from people whose opinions apparently mattered more than his daughter lying in a hospital bed. Yeha emerged from the emergency room, her small face puffy from crying. She walked straight past her parents and stopped in front of Maurice, looking up with eyes that held too much understanding for a 7-year-old. "Uni is asking for you," she whispered in Korean. She won't stop crying. Behind them, Hwa-jin stiffened. "That's inappropriate. Yeha, come here." But Yeha didn't move. She reached out and took Maurice's hand, her small fingers wrapping around the older woman's with desperate trust. The emergency room door opened again, and the doctor stepped out, her gaze moving between the Han family members with careful assessment. "Ye-sol is stable, but I need to be clear about something." She paused, choosing her words with obvious care. This wasn't just a fainting spell from momentary stress. This child shows signs of sustained emotional exhaustion. Her body essentially shut down under the weight of distress it couldn't process anymore. "What are you suggesting?" Do-kyun's voice was quiet, dangerous. "I'm suggesting," the doctor continued calmly, "that this didn't start today. Children don't collapse like this from a single incident. They collapse when they've been holding too much for too long." The words hung in the sterile air like an indictment. A soft murmur rippled through the waiting area as other patients and visitors recognized the Han family, their whispered conversations peppered with phrases like, "that video," and "poor child," and "what kind of parents." Do-kyun looked at his phone again, at the video that had transformed his family into Hampyeong's most compelling tragedy, then at his wife's rigid posture, then at Yeha still clutching Maurice's hand, and finally at the emergency room door behind which his daughter lay asking for the woman he'd just dismissed. When he spoke, his voice carried through the waiting room with unexpected clarity, loud enough for every gossiping witness to hear. "Maurice returns home with us. The decision was mine. And I was wrong. Hua Jin's head snapped toward her husband, her hand flying to her necklace with such force that several pearls scattered across the floor, and the look in her eyes promised that this was far from over. The mansion felt different when Maurice walked through its doors the second time. The same marble floors gleamed under the same expensive lighting. The same cedarwood scent lingered in the air. But something fundamental had shifted, like returning to a childhood home only to find all the furniture rearranged by strangers. It had been 3 days since the hospital. 3 days since Do-kyun's public declaration. 3 days since Hua Jin's scattered pearls had rolled across the waiting room floor like tiny white witnesses to her humiliation. Maurice carried her canvas bag up the servants' stairs, each step feeling heavier than before. The twins had been overjoyed at her return, throwing themselves into her arms with such force she'd nearly stumbled. But their joy couldn't erase the cold weight of Hua Jin's gaze following her through every room, marking her presence like a threat that needed constant surveillance. The schedule appeared on Maurice's door the next morning, a printed sheet with times and tasks listed in meticulous detail. Nothing unusual, except that her working hours had been shifted. Instead of the comfortable 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. routine she'd maintained for 3 years, she now started at 5:30 a.m. and finished at 8 p.m. The evening hours overlapped perfectly with the twins' bedtime, ensuring minimal interaction. Mrs. Han thought it would be more efficient this way, explained Signora Im Dayan, the head housekeeper who'd worked for the Han family for 15 years. She was a woman in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair, pulled into a tight bun, and eyes that had witnessed too many household dramas to be surprised by anything anymore. She handed Maurice the schedule without meeting her eyes, but her hand trembled slightly as she did. "Da-yeon-si," Maurice said quietly in Korean, accepting the paper. "Has this happened before?" The older woman's jaw tightened. She glanced down the hallway, left, then right, before leaning in closer. 3 housekeepers ago," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the morning sounds of the mansion waking up. Mrs. Han didn't like how close the children got to her, started changing schedules, moving tasks around, creating situations where mistakes became inevitable. What happened to her? She quit after 2 months. Said the constant testing made her feel like she was walking on eggshells that someone kept deliberately placing in her path. Dayan straightened, her professional mask sliding back into place. "But I didn't tell you that, and you should probably start your morning duties now. The kitchen needs to be prepared by 6. The pattern revealed itself slowly, like a photograph developing in chemical solution. Tasks that had been Maurice's responsibility for years were suddenly reassigned, then reassigned back at the last minute with notes about how the replacement wasn't done properly. Supplies she needed would be moved to different locations without notice. The twins' afternoon snack time, previously a sacred routine where Maurice would sit with them and hear about their day, was rescheduled to overlap with her new deep cleaning duties in the opposite wing of the house. Hua Jin orchestrated it all with the precision of a conductor leading a silent symphony of passive hostility. She never raised her voice, never made direct accusations, but her presence became a constant pressure, appearing in doorways at unexpected moments, observing with those calculating eyes, while her fingers absently adjusted that pearl necklace. On the 4th day, Maurice was cleaning the 2nd-floor hallway when she heard Yesol's voice drifting from the study. "But why can't Marisa C help me with my homework anymore? She explains things better than the tutor." "Because Maurice has other responsibilities now." Hua Jin's voice was patient but firm, the tone of someone explaining obvious facts to a slow child. "And you need to learn to be more independent. You're 7 years old, Yesol. It's not appropriate to be so attached to the help." The word, help, landed like a slap Maurice could feel from 20 feet away. "She's not just help." Yeha's quieter voice joined in, defensive and hurt. "She's our friend. That's exactly the problem." Maurice moved away before she could hear more, her cleaning supplies rattling slightly in the bucket she carried. She found refuge in the library, a room rarely used by the family, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the carefully manicured garden and morning light filtered through expensive curtains. She was dusting the upper shelves when she noticed Do-kyun's office door slightly ajar across the hall. Through the gap, she could see his desk, and scattered across its polished surface were documents bearing official seals and legal letterhead. One folder lay open, revealing what looked like property deeds and transfer papers. all marked with red flags and handwritten notes in the margins. The amount of paperwork suggested something significant was being prepared, something that involved lawyers and signatures and decisions that would ripple through this household in ways Maurice couldn't yet understand. She turned away quickly, but the image stayed with her. Those documents spread out like evidence of coming storms. That evening, as Maurice finished her extended shift, she found Yesol and Yeha sitting on the stairs near the servants' quarters, clearly waiting for her. They wore their matching pink pajamas, hair still damp from their bath, faces so hopeful it broke something inside her chest. "We made you a picture," Yesol said, holding out a drawing with both hands like an offering. "Yama said we couldn't give it to you during the day, but she didn't say anything about nighttime." The drawing showed the four of them, Maurice and the twins, and even Huajin, all holding hands in front of the mansion. Above them, a rainbow arced across a smiling sun. At the bottom, in careful Hangul characters, Yeha had written, "Our family is better when everyone is happy." Maurice knelt down, taking the drawing with hands that shook. "This is beautiful, my sweet girls. Thank you. Do you think Yama will be happy again?" Yeha asked, her voice small and worried. She's been very quiet lately, and she keeps touching her necklace like she does when something is wrong. Before Maurice could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed from the main hallway. The twins stiffened, recognizing the distinctive rhythm of their mother's approach. Huajin appeared at the top of the stairs, her expression unreadable in the dim lighting. She looked at the drawing in Maurice's hands, at her daughters sitting on the stairs past their bedtime, at the small scene of forbidden connection happening in the shadows of her perfectly ordered home. "Girls, go to bed. Now." They obeyed immediately, but not before Yesol pressed the drawing more firmly into Maurice's hands, a silent plea to keep it safe. When the children disappeared into their room, Huajin remained standing there, backlit by the hallway chandelier, one hand rising automatically to her necklace. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. "This won't work," Huajin finally said, her voice soft but sharp as glass. "Whatever you think this is." Then she turned and walked away, leaving Maurice alone in the servants' quarters with the children's drawing, and the growing certainty that she'd returned to a house that no longer wanted her, held hostage by two little girls who needed her too much to let go. The argument started at 11:47 p.m. Maurice knew because she'd been lying awake in her small room, watching the digital clock on her nightstand tick forward, minute by agonizing minute, when the voices began filtering through the walls. Do-kyun's voice came first, low and controlled, but with an edge she'd never heard before. "You took the drawing from their hands and destroyed it. In front of them? Huajin, what were you thinking?" Maurice sat up slowly, her heart hammering. She hadn't witnessed this. It must have happened after she'd gone to bed, during one of Huajin's evening checks on the girls. "I was thinking," Huajin's voice came back, sharp and defensive, "that our daughters need to understand boundaries. That drawing had her in the center, Do-kyun, in the center of our family, not me, her. So your solution was to tear it up? To make them cry themselves to sleep? Don't you dare!" Huajin's voice cracked, and suddenly the tone shifted into something raw and unguarded. "Don't you dare judge me for trying to maintain some semblance of authority in my own home. Do you know what it feels like? To watch your own children run past you to someone else? To hear them laugh with her in ways they never laugh with me?" Silence fell, heavy and thick. Maurice pressed her hand against her mouth, torn between the instinct to move away and the inability to stop listening to this unraveling happening just beyond her wall. "Huajin." Do-kyun's voice had softened, but it carried through clearly. "When was the last time you sat down with them? Really sat down, without your phone, without your social obligations, and just listened? I'm busy. I have responsibilities. The charity board, the country club committee, maintaining relationships that matter for your business. Maintaining appearances, you mean?" "Yes." The word exploded from Huajin like a confession she'd been holding back for years. "Yes, appearances. Because that's what holds families like ours together, Do-kyun. That's what I was taught. That's what kept my family from falling apart when—" She stopped abruptly, and in that sudden silence, Maurice could hear something that sounded like sobbing. Quiet, restrained, but unmistakably there. "When what?" Do-kyun pressed gently. "When my mother left." Huajin's voice was barely a whisper now, but in the late-night stillness, every word carried with painful clarity. "I was 9 years old. 9. And the only thing my father told me was that she left because we weren't good enough, weren't perfect enough to make her want to stay. So he made sure I would be perfect. No crying, no weakness, no getting attached to anyone who could leave. Maurice closed her eyes, a wave of understanding washing over her that felt both clarifying and devastating. And Maurice can leave, Do-kyun said slowly, working through the logic. So you've been trying to make them stop loving her before she does, before they get hurt the way I did. Hwa-jin's voice broke completely now, years of carefully maintained composure crumbling in the darkness. Because I see the way they look at her, Do-kyun, the way they trust her. And I know that I should be grateful someone cares for them so well when I can't seem to what? Be enough. The words came out like a physical pain. I don't know how to be what they need. I try, but every time I walk into their room, I see my father's face telling me to stand up straight, stop crying, be presentable. And I hear myself saying the same controlling things to them, and I hate it, but I don't know how else to be. Footsteps moved across the floor above, Do-kyun crossing to where his wife stood. You think pushing Maurice away will fix that? He asked quietly. I think having her here reminds me every single day that I'm failing as a mother. That some woman we hired off the street can give my daughters what I can't. Hwa-jin's voice steadied slightly, taking on a bitter edge. Do you know what the worst part is? I don't even blame them for preferring her. If I were them, I'd prefer her too. A long pause followed, filled only with the sound of muffled crying and whispered comfort Maurice couldn't quite make out. Then Yesol's small voice cut through from somewhere nearby. Appa? Iyama? Why are you fighting? Maurice's door was close enough to the main hallway that she could hear the sudden scrambling, the quick adjustment of voices, the desperate attempt to shield children from adult pain they'd already heard. We're not fighting, sweetheart, Hwa-jin said, her voice miraculously steady despite what she'd just revealed. We're just talking about grown-up things. Go back to bed. Is it about Maurice? Yeha's voice joined her sister's. Are you going to make her leave again? No one is leaving, Do-kyun said firmly. I promise you, no one is leaving. But the tremor in his voice suggested he wasn't entirely sure he could keep that promise. Maurice heard the soft padding of small feet being guided back to bed, heard Do-kyun's gentle murmuring, and the twins' reluctant acceptance. She waited until the hallway fell silent again, before finally lying back down, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. She thought about Hwa-jin's confession, about a 9-year-old girl whose mother vanished, and whose father responded by demanding perfection instead of offering love. About a woman who'd grown up learning that attachment meant inevitable abandonment, that showing weakness invited loss. About a mother who was terrified her daughters would be hurt the same way she was, and who'd chosen control over connection, because it was the only protection she knew. Maurice understood now why Hwa-jin touched her necklace so compulsively. It was probably a gift from her father, a physical reminder of the standards she could never quite meet, the approval she could never quite earn. Around 1 a.m., Maurice finally heard Do-kyun and Hwa-jin's bedroom door close. But even in the silence that followed, she couldn't sleep, because now she understood that this wasn't a simple story of a jealous wife or a cruel employer. This was a story about inherited pain, about cycles of emotional absence passed down like cursed heirlooms, about people hurting each other while trying desperately not to hurt at all. And Maurice, lying in her small room in this grand mansion, realized that the solution wasn't as simple as staying or leaving. The real question was, how do you break a cycle that's been spinning for generations? The answer, she suspected, was about to get much more complicated, because at 1:23 a.m., she heard Do-kyun's phone ring, a sound sharp and intrusive in the sleeping house, heard his muffled greeting, heard the long pause, heard the single word that changed everything. When? Then footsteps, quick and urgent, moving through the hallway, a door opening. Do-kyun's voice, rough with an emotion Maurice couldn't identify. I need to leave, tonight. I'll explain when I get back, but I need to go now. And Hwa-jin's response, small and frightened in a way that made her sound like that 9-year-old girl again. You're leaving? Right now? But you promised. I know what I promised. But this can't wait. The front door opened and closed. An engine started, and the house settled into a new kind of silence, one that felt like holding its breath before the fall. The morning came too bright and too empty. Sunlight streamed through the mansion's tall windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like tiny witnesses to the absence that now filled every room. Do-kyun had been gone for 3 days, and the house felt like a ship without its captain, still floating, but drifting in directions no one had intended. Maurice found Hwa-jin in the kitchen at 6 a.m., standing in front of the coffee maker, with a look of pure confusion on her face. She wore an elegant silk robe, ivory with delicate embroidery along the sleeves, but her hair was uncombed, and her eyes were shadowed with sleeplessness. Her hand kept rising to her necklace, adjusting it compulsively, the pearls clicking softly against each other. "Mrs. Han," Maurice approached carefully, as one might approach a wounded animal. "Can I help you with something?" Hwa-jin stared at the coffee maker, as if it were a puzzle she'd never encountered before. "He always makes the coffee," she said quietly. "Every morning for 12 years. I don't actually know how this machine works." The admission hung in the air between them. This wealthy woman, educated at Seoul National University, who could coordinate charity galas and manage household staff, completely undone by an automated coffee maker because her husband had always handled this one small morning ritual. "Here." Maurice stepped forward gently, demonstrating the simple process. "Water in this compartment, grounds in the filter. Press this button." Hwa-jin watched with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to the task, as if learning to make coffee was actually learning how to function in a world where Do-kyun might not come back. When the machine gurgled to life and dark liquid began filling the pot, she looked at Maurice with something that might have been gratitude, or might have been resentment, probably both. "Thank you," she whispered, then immediately left the kitchen, coffee forgotten. The twins appeared 20 minutes later, dressed in their school uniforms, but moving with the cautious uncertainty of children navigating a house that had suddenly become unfamiliar. Yesol's ribbon was tied incorrectly, one loop significantly larger than the other. Yeha's socks didn't match, one white with pink trim, one plain white. Small details that Do-kyun would have noticed and gently corrected during breakfast. Small details that revealed how much his presence had quietly held things together. "Where's Appa?" Yesol asked, sliding into her chair at the breakfast table. Her voice tried to sound casual, but Maurice could hear the tremor underneath. "He's away on business," Hwa-jin answered from the doorway, having returned with fresh makeup carefully applied to hide the circles under her eyes. "He'll be back soon." "That's what you said yesterday," Yeha pointed out. "And the day before." "Well, it's still true." Maurice prepared their usual breakfast, toast with strawberry jam, sliced fruit, and warm milk, while watching Hwa-jin attempt to sit with her daughters. She pulled out a chair, sat down, reached for her phone, then seemed to remember something and placed it face down on the table. Her fingers drummed against the wood, seeking something to occupy them now that the phone was forbidden. "How was your homework last night?" Hwa-jin asked, her tone awkward but genuine. "Fine," Yesol answered automatically. "Did you finish everything?" "Yes." "And you understood it all?" "Yes, Iyama." The conversation died there, suffocated by its own forced nature. Hwa-jin's hand moved to her necklace, then stopped halfway, redirecting to smooth her hair instead. She was trying. Maurice could see the effort radiating from her like heat, but years of emotional distance couldn't be bridged over strawberry toast and uncomfortable questions. After the twins left for school, Maurice found herself cleaning the main living room while Hwa-jin sat on the sofa, laptop open but clearly not working. Every few minutes she'd check her phone, her face tightening with each message notification that wasn't from her husband. "Mrs. Han," Senior Im appeared in the doorway, holding a small package. "This was just delivered. It's addressed to Mr. Han, marked urgent." Hwa-jin took the package with trembling hands. It was a plain manila envelope, thick with contents, sealed with official-looking tape. She turned it over several times, clearly debating whether opening her husband's mail crossed some line she wasn't ready to cross yet. She opened it. Inside were documents, legal papers, financial statements, and what looked like property surveys. But it was the letter clipped to the front that made Hwa-jin's face go pale. Maurice couldn't read the contents from across the room, but she watched Hwa-jin's lips move silently, forming words that seemed to hit her like physical blows. "He's selling the company," Hwa-jin whispered, looking up at no one in particular. He's liquidating his father's company, the one his family built for 3 generations. Senior Im's expression remained carefully neutral, but Maurice saw her hands clasped together tightly. Why would he do that? Hua Jin continued, more to herself than to them. Unless something's terribly wrong. Unless he knows something we don't. She pulled out her phone and called Do Kyun's number. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. On the third attempt, her composure finally cracked, and she hurled the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a sharp crack, the screen splintering into a web of broken glass. The twins came home from school to find their mother sitting in the dark living room, curtains drawn against the afternoon sun, surrounded by scattered papers and broken phone pieces. They stood in the doorway, school bags still on their shoulders, looking at this stranger who wore their mother's face, but seemed to have forgotten how to be her. Aoma? Yesol's voice was very small. Are you okay? Hua Jin looked up, and for a moment, she seemed not to recognize her own children. Then something shifted, and she reached out her arms, a gesture so uncharacteristic, so desperate, that the twins hesitated before moving forward. I don't know how to do this without him, Hua Jin whispered into Yeha's hair as she held both girls close. I don't know how to be enough. That night, after putting the twins to bed with extra stories and gentle reassurances they didn't quite believe, Maurice was gathering laundry from Do Kyun's office when she noticed something, a photograph partially hidden under the scattered documents. She picked it up carefully. It showed a much younger Do Kyun standing in front of a small house, arms around an elderly woman. Both were smiling, genuinely happy. The photo was creased and worn, as if it had been handled many times. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, Busan, 1998, the year everything changed. Maurice was about to put it back when she heard footsteps behind her. That's his grandmother, Hua Jin said from the doorway, her voice hoarse from crying. The one who raised him after his parents died in the Seongsu Bridge collapse. The vase you broke, that was hers. The only thing she left him besides memories and a small insurance policy he used to build everything we have now. The confession settled between them like a shared secret. Mrs. Han, he's not coming back soon, is he? Hua Jin interrupted, looking directly at Maurice for perhaps the first time since this all began. Something's wrong. Really wrong. And I'm going to have to figure out how to hold this family together. And I have absolutely no idea how to do that. Before Maurice could respond, Senior Im appeared at the end of the hallway, her face grave. Mrs. Han, there's someone at the door. A neighbor. She says there's something you need to see immediately. They followed her downstairs, where Mrs. Kang from 3 houses down stood holding her phone, her expression somewhere between concern and the barely suppressed excitement of someone delivering dramatic news. I'm so sorry to disturb you this late, she said, not sounding sorry at all. But this photo has been circulating since this afternoon, and I thought you should know. She turned her phone around. The image showed Do Kyun standing outside what looked like a hospital in an unfamiliar city, his face drawn and exhausted, being supported by 2 people in medical uniforms. The angle suggested it had been taken secretly, from a distance. The timestamp read, yesterday, 3:47 p.m. Where is this? Hua Jin's voice was barely a whisper. Busan, Mrs. Kang answered. Someone recognized him at the cancer treatment center. The word, cancer, seemed to suck all the air from the room. And somewhere upstairs, through the walls and floors of this beautiful mansion, Maurice could hear one of the twins crying softly in her sleep. The words spread through Hampyeong like smoke through paper walls, invisible but impossible to ignore. By morning, everyone knew. The prestigious Han family, pillars of the community, were crumbling from the inside, not from scandal or financial ruin, but from something far more human, and therefore far more terrifying, vulnerability. Maurice watched from the kitchen window as neighbors walked past the house more slowly than necessary, their eyes drawn to the windows as if they might catch a glimpse of tragedy unfolding in real time. Some carried food, the Korean tradition of bringing comfort through homemade banchan and warm soup, but they lingered at the gate, uncertain whether their offerings would be welcome or intrusive. Inside, the mansion had transformed into a theater of carefully maintained normalcy that fooled no one. Hua Jin moved through the rooms like a ghost, her silk robe replaced by perfectly pressed clothing, her makeup flawlessly applied, her hair styled with precision. But her hands gave her away, constantly touching her necklace, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her clothes, reaching for a phone she'd replaced but barely looked at anymore. She'd made exactly 43 calls to Do Kyun's number in the past 24 hours. Maurice knew because she'd heard each one, heard the same desperate greeting, followed by the same hollow silence when the call went to voicemail. The twins stopped asking where their father was. That was somehow worse than their constant questions had been. Now they simply moved through their routines with a quietness that sat wrong on 7-year-old shoulders, getting ready for school without prompting, eating breakfast without complaint, doing homework without being reminded. They'd become tiny adults overnight, as if sensing that childhood was a luxury their family could no longer afford. "Maurice, see?" Yesol whispered one evening as Maurice tucked them into bed. "Is Appa going to disappear like Iama's mother did?" The question pierced straight through Maurice's carefully maintained composure. She sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words with the same care one might use diffusing an explosive device. "Your father loves you very much. Whatever he's dealing with, that love hasn't changed. But love isn't enough sometimes, is it?" Yeha's voice came from the other bed, small but unnervingly perceptive. Iama's mother probably loved her too, but she still left. Maurice had no answer that wouldn't be a lie or a truth too heavy for children to carry. Downstairs, Huajin sat in Do-kyun's office, surrounded by the documents that had arrived days ago. She'd been there for hours, trying to decipher the legal language, the financial projections, the careful planning that suggested her husband had been preparing for this moment, long before that midnight phone call. Senior Im found her there past midnight, still dressed, still reading, a cold cup of tea forgotten at her elbow. "Mrs. Han, you should rest." "I can't." Huajin's voice was flat, emptied of emotion by sheer exhaustion. "If I stop moving, if I stop trying to understand what's happening, then I have to face the fact that my husband might be—" She stopped, unable to say the word that had been haunting this house since Mrs. Kang's revelation, that he might be handling something terrible alone because he doesn't think I'm strong enough to help him. "Perhaps he's trying to protect you. By shutting me out?" Huajin laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "That's not protection, Da-yan. That's abandonment dressed up as sacrifice." The older woman settled into the chair across from her, a gesture that broke the usual boundaries between employer and employee. 15 years I've worked for this family," she said quietly. "I watched Mr. Han build his company from almost nothing, watched him marry you, watched those beautiful girls come into this world, and in all that time, I've never seen him take the easy path. Whatever he's doing now, it's not because he doesn't trust you or doesn't love you. Then why won't he call? Why won't he tell me what's happening?" Senior Im was quiet for a long moment, because some men believe that being strong means carrying everything alone, and by the time they realize that's not strength but pride, they're already buried too deep to call for help. The words settled over Huajin like a weighted blanket, comforting and suffocating at once. The next morning brought new whispers, neighbors commenting not with cruelty, but with the peculiar satisfaction of watching the perfect family finally show its cracks. The Hans were no longer untouchable, no longer the pristine example everyone measured themselves against. They'd become human, and humans could be pitied, gossiped about, secretly relieved over, because now everyone else's problems didn't seem quite so shameful in comparison. Mrs. Kang stopped by again, this time with a container of miok guk and an expression of exaggerated concern. "I heard through my cousin who works at the hospital in Busan," she said to Huajin at the door, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "They say he's been going there for weeks. Weeks, Huajin see. And no one knew." Huajin accepted the soup with mechanical politeness, but Maurice saw the way her jaw tightened, the way her hand flew to her necklace with such force she nearly tore it from her neck. After Mrs. Kang left, Huajin stood in the foyer holding the container of soup, staring at it as if it might contain answers instead of seaweed and broth. Then, slowly, deliberately, she walked to the kitchen and poured the entire contents down the sink. "I don't want their pity," she said to no one in particular, her voice shaking. "I don't want their knowing looks and their whispered theories. I want my husband to come home. I want to stop feeling like I'm drowning in my own house." She turned to find Yesol and Yeha standing in the doorway, still in their school uniforms, their identical faces wearing identical expressions of worry so profound it looked physically painful. "Ioma," Yesol said carefully, as if testing ice that might crack under the weight of her words. "We heard Mrs. Kang say Appa is sick. Is that true?" Huajin opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. She looked at Maurice standing near the counter, a silent plea for help in her eyes. Maurice moved forward, placing herself slightly between Huajin and the girls. "Your father is taking care of some important things," she said gently. "And yes, he might not be feeling his best right now, but he's getting help, and he's going to come home." "You don't know that," Yeha said, her voice breaking. "Nobody knows that. Everyone's pretending, but we can hear you all at night. We can hear Yama crying. We can hear the phone calls that nobody answers. The accusation, because that's what it was, an accusation of dishonesty wrapped in a child's devastation, hung in the air like smoke." Huajin's face crumpled. She slid down to her knees right there on the kitchen floor, her expensive clothes creasing, her perfect hair falling forward to hide her face. The girls ran to her immediately, wrapping their small arms around their mother, as she finally, completely, broke. "I'm so sorry," Huajin sobbed into their hair. "I'm so sorry I don't know how to fix this. I'm so sorry I'm not strong enough. I'm so sorry your father is—" She couldn't finish, the words drowning in tears. And for the first time since Maurice had known this family, the four of them, Huajin, Yesol, Yeha, and even Maurice standing witness, existed in a moment of complete, unvarnished truth. No performance, no pretense, just raw, terrifying honesty about the fact that none of them knew what came next. Later that night, as Maurice was preparing to retire to her room, she noticed a light still on in Do-kyun's office. Inside, she found a sealed box she'd seen before but never touched, the one that had arrived days ago and sat unopened on his desk. Something compelled her to look closer. The return address was from a legal firm in Busan, and written on the side, in Do-kyun's handwriting, "Open only if I don't come home." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway came at 4:17 a.m. on the 7th day. Maurice heard it first. She'd been lying awake, as she had every night since Do-kyun left, listening to the house breathe and creak and settle into its anxieties. The engine cut off. A car door opened and closed with careful quietness, as if the person arriving didn't want to disturb anyone, or perhaps didn't want to announce their presence until absolutely necessary. She moved to her window and saw him, Han Do-kyun, standing beside his black sedan in the pre-dawn darkness, staring up at his own house as if it were a foreign country he'd never visited before. Even from a distance, even in the dim glow of the security lights, she could see he'd changed. His shoulders curved inward slightly, his normally perfect posture compromised by something more than simple exhaustion. He carried a small bag, the kind one takes to hospitals for extended stays. He stood there for 5 full minutes, just looking at the mansion, before finally walking toward the front door. Maurice heard Huajin's bedroom door open almost immediately. She'd been awake too, probably lying there counting the hours, measuring the distance between hope and abandonment. Footsteps rushed down the hallway, then slowed, then stopped entirely at the top of the stairs. Do-kyun entered through the front door using his key, moving with the careful deliberation of someone navigating a minefield. He set his bag down in the foyer and looked up to find his wife standing on the landing above, backlit by the hallway light, wearing one of his old university sweatshirts over her silk pajamas. "You came back," Huajin said, and those 3 words contained multitudes. Relief and anger and fear and accusation all wrapped together so tightly they were indistinguishable from each other. "I said I would. You said a lot of things." Her voice cracked. "You said no one was leaving. You said you'd explain. You said—" She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth as if physically holding back everything she wanted to scream. 7 days, Do-kyun. 7 days of nothing. Do you know what that did to us? To your daughters? To me?" He climbed the stairs slowly, each step seeming to cost him something. When he reached the landing, Maurice could see his face clearly for the first time, the hollows under his eyes, the weight he'd lost, the gray tinge to his skin that spoke of treatments and procedures and pain managed, but not eliminated. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words sounded like they'd been carved out of him. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I could just handle it alone, just get through the worst of it before what?" Huajin's anger finally broke through, hot and raw. "Before you collapsed? Before you disappeared completely? Before our daughters had to hear from neighbors that their father might be—" She couldn't say it, the word that had been haunting them all. "Sick." Do-kyun said it for her, quiet and final. "The word is sick," Hua-jin. I'm sick. Stage 2. Caught early enough that treatment is possible but not guaranteed. And I didn't tell you because I didn't know how to watch you look at me the way you're looking at me right now, like I'm already gone. The confession fell between them like broken glass. From their bedroom doorway, partially hidden in shadow, Yesol and Yeha appeared, woken by their parents' voices. They stood frozen, little ghosts in matching pajamas, their eyes wide and frightened as they processed words they'd hoped never to hear confirmed. Appa? Yesol's voice was barely a whisper. Dokyun turned, and his carefully maintained composure shattered completely. He dropped to his knees right there in the hallway, arms opening wide, and both girls ran to him, crashing into his embrace with enough force to nearly knock him backward. He held them so tightly, Maurice could see his knuckles turning white, his face buried in their hair as his shoulders shook with silent sobs. I'm here, he whispered into their trembling bodies. I'm here, and I'm fighting, and I'm not going anywhere without giving this everything I have. You promise? Yeha asked, her voice muffled against his chest. I promise to try. That's all anyone can promise, sweetheart. To try as hard as they can. Maurice watched from below, witnessing this private devastation, and knew she should leave, give them space for this family moment. But Hua-jin's eyes found hers across the distance, and something passed between them, a shared understanding that this moment needed a witness, someone to remember that they'd all been here, all been broken together, all been trying to find their way through darkness with no guarantee of light. Later, after the girls had been coaxed back to bed with promises that Appa would still be there in the morning, Dokyun sat in his office while Hua-jin brought him tea, a role reversal that felt significant and strange. Maurice prepared to leave them alone, but Dokyun called her name. Maurice, please stay. There are things I need to say to both of you. She settled into a chair near the window, while Hua-jin took the seat across from his desk, her hands wrapped around her own teacup, as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. The company is being sold, Dokyun said without preamble. The proceeds will go into trusts for the girls' education and future, with enough set aside for treatment costs and other eventualities. The house is paid off, so you'll always have somewhere to live regardless of what happens. And I've arranged for— Stop! Hua-jin's voice was sharp. Stop planning your absence like it's inevitable. Stop making decisions as if you're already gone. You're here now. You're getting treatment. That means we fight this together, not separately. I've been trying to protect you, by shutting me out, by making me feel useless and helpless, and like I'm watching my family dissolve from the inside. She set down her teacup with enough force that tea sloshed over the rim. I spent my entire childhood being protected from the truth, Dokyun. It didn't make anything better. It just made me unprepared for reality when it finally hit. Dokyun looked at his wife, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. You're right, he said finally. You're absolutely right. I was so focused on being strong that I forgot strength. Sometimes means being vulnerable enough to ask for help. He turned to Maurice then, his expression softening. And you, I need to thank you, for staying when we made it nearly impossible, for caring for my daughters when I couldn't be here, for— his voice caught, for reminding this family what it means to actually see each other. Maurice felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Mr. Han, please let me finish. He pulled out a folder from his desk drawer, the one with the torn pages she'd noticed weeks ago. I've been keeping a journal, trying to figure out how to be better at this, at being present, at being a father, at building a life instead of just a legacy. And watching you with my daughters showed me what I'd been missing, what we'd all been missing. He opened the journal, and Maurice could see pages filled with his neat handwriting, observations, reflections, plans for family dinners and weekend activities and small rituals that would prioritize connection over appearances. I wanted to surprise everyone once treatment was finished, he continued. Wanted to come back not just healthy but changed, better. But that was just another form of control, wasn't it? Another way of trying to manage everyone's emotions instead of living through them together. The three of them sat in silence as dawn began breaking outside the windows, painting the room in shades of gray and gold. Somewhere in the house, the twins stirred in their sleep. Somewhere beyond the walls, Hampyeong was waking up to another day of whispers and speculation. But inside this office, in this moment, something was shifting. Something fragile and new and terrifying in its honesty. I need to tell you something, Maurice said quietly. her decision crystallizing even as she spoke. Something I've been thinking about since all of this began. Both Do-kyun and Hwa-jin turned to look at her, waiting. And Maurice realized that what she was about to say would change everything once again. "I'm going to leave this house," Maurice said, and the words fell into the dawn-lit office like stones into still water, rippling outward in waves neither she nor anyone else could stop. Do-kyun's face went pale. "Maurice-si, if this is about what happened before, I already apologized. It's not about that." She held up her hand gently, stopping him. "It's not about being fired or coming back or any of the conflict. It's about something I've realized while watching all of you struggle these past weeks." Hwa-jin's fingers moved instinctively to her necklace, but then stopped, fell to her lap instead. "What have you realized?" Maurice took a slow breath, choosing her words with the same care one might use arranging flowers, each stem placed deliberately, each element contributing to a larger truth. "I've realized that sometimes the kindest thing we can do for people we love is to step back and let them find their own way of loving each other." The silence that followed was heavy with incomprehension. "I don't understand." Yesol's voice came from the doorway. Both girls stood there in their pajamas, hair mussed from sleep, faces still puffy from yesterday's tears. They must have woken again, drawn by adult voices discussing things that would reshape their world. "Why would you leave if you love us?" Maurice's heart cracked clean down the middle. She crossed the room and knelt before them, taking both their small hands in hers. "My sweet girls, I do love you. So much that it hurts sometimes. But love isn't about holding on so tight that people can't breathe. Sometimes love means giving space for other love to grow." "That doesn't make sense," Yeha whispered, tears already streaming down her cheeks. "I know it doesn't. Not yet. But someday it will." Maurice looked up at Hwa-jin, who sat frozen in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Your Iyama is learning how to show you the love she's always felt, but didn't know how to express. And as long as I'm here, being the safe person, the easy person to run to, she'll never have to learn. She'll always have an excuse not to try. That's not fair to you," Do-kyun said quietly. "To put that responsibility—" "I'm not putting responsibility anywhere," Maurice interrupted gently. "I'm simply recognizing a truth. This family needs to heal itself, and healing requires discomfort. It requires facing each other without buffers or intermediaries. It requires Hwa-jin to be the one tucking her daughters into bed every night, hearing their fears, wiping their tears. It requires you to be present, not just physically, but emotionally, even when you're scared or tired or unsure." She stood slowly, her knees protesting, and turned to face Hwa-jin directly. "And it requires you to forgive yourself for not being perfect, to understand that your daughters don't need perfection. They just need you, the real you, the one who cries and makes mistakes and doesn't always know what to say." Hwa-jin's hand finally moved to her necklace, touching the pearls that represented years of trying to live up to impossible standards. Then, in a gesture so small but so significant it seemed to shift the very air in the room, she unclasped the necklace and set it on the desk. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "I'm terrified they'll reject me, that I've already lost too much time, made too many mistakes, that they'll never—" "Iyama." Yesol pulled away from Maurice and walked to her mother, climbing into her lap with the casual confidence of a child who'd always belonged there, but had forgotten how to claim that space. "We don't want you to be perfect. We just want you to be here. Really here." Yeha joined her sister, wrapping her arms around Hwa-jin's neck. "And we want you to stop being sad all the time. Even when you smile, you look sad, like you're pretending everything's okay when it's not." Hwa-jin held her daughters, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and long buried. "I'm so sorry," she kept repeating. "I'm so sorry I didn't know how. I'm so sorry it took almost losing everything to figure out what actually matters." Do-kyun moved from his desk chair to kneel beside his family, wrapping his arms around all three of them, creating a circle that, for the first time since Maurice had known them, looked complete without her in it. And that's when she knew her decision was right. Over the next 3 days, Maurice prepared for her departure with quiet efficiency. She trained Hwa-jin on the girls' routines, not just the logistics of bedtimes and homework, but the emotional details. How Yesol needed extra reassurance before tests, how Yeha processed feelings through drawing, how both girls responded better to gentle guidance than strict rules. She watched as Hwa-jin fumbled through bedtime stories, choosing books too advanced, and then laughing at her mistake instead of pretending she'd meant to do it. She witnessed the first time Hua Jin sat with the twins during their afternoon snack, phone left in another room entirely, actually listening as they talked about their day. She saw Do-kyun teaching his daughters how to make his famous weekend pancakes, the recipe his grandmother had taught him. Saw him pause to catch his breath more often than he wanted to admit. Saw Hua Jin's eyes tracking every moment of weakness with barely contained fear. Saw the girls learning that loving someone meant being present through the scary parts too. On her final evening, Maurice sat at the small desk in her room and wrote a letter. Not because she couldn't say goodbye in person. She would. She had. But because some truths needed to be held in hands and revisited when doubt crept in during quiet moments. She wrote about the privilege of witnessing their journey, about the strength it takes to be vulnerable, about how families aren't defined by perfection, but by the willingness to keep trying, even when everything feels impossible. And at the end, she wrote, "The care continues, even when the presence goes away. Love doesn't disappear with distance. It transforms into something that lives in the small moments, in the way you tuck them in at night, in the stories you tell, in the patience you show when patience feels impossible. You are enough. You have always been enough. You just had to learn to believe it." The morning she left, the entire family stood at the door, not crying. They'd done enough of that, but present, fully present, in a way they'd never been before. Yesol handed her a drawing. The four of them, Do-kyun, Hua Jin, and both girls, standing in front of the mansion under a rainbow. In the sky above them, a small figure with Maurice's face smiled down like a guardian angel. "So you're always watching over us," Yesol explained. "Even when you're not here," Yeha added. Maurice folded the drawing carefully and placed it in her bag alongside the letter she'd written for them. She hugged each person, the girls first, then Do-kyun with his brave smile and scared eyes, and finally, Hua Jin, who whispered against her ear, "Thank you for seeing us. Really seeing us. Thank you for letting me," Maurice whispered back. She walked down the front path, past the gate where Mrs. Kang had filmed that first devastating collapse, past the gardens she'd helped maintain, past 3 years of memories embedded in every stone and flower. At the end of the driveway, she turned back once. They were still standing there. This family she'd helped piece back together not by staying, but by leaving at exactly the right moment, standing together, holding each other, facing whatever came next as a unit instead of isolated individuals orbiting the same house. The morning sun broke through the clouds, painting everything in shades of gold and hope. And Maurice walked forward into her own next chapter, carrying with her the knowledge that sometimes the greatest gift we can give is teaching others they don't need us as much as they think they do. Behind her, inside the mansion, Hua Jin wiped her eyes and turned to her daughters. "What should we make for breakfast?" she asked. "Together?" Yesol asked hopefully. "Together," Hua Jin confirmed, taking both their hands. "Always together from now on. In the end, what remains is not the conflict, nor the silence, nor even the moment when everything seemed to fall apart. What lingers is the quiet truth that every choice we make leaves a mark on the hearts around us. A single decision, taken in haste or fear, can reshape an entire home. And sometimes, the person who holds a family together is the one who was never meant to stay forever. Their presence becomes a reminder that care is not measured by roles or titles, but by intention, patience, and the courage to show kindness where it is least expected. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, if you stood in the protagonist's place, would you have had the strength to listen before acting? To see beyond pride, fear, or insecurity, and recognize the person who offered what no one else dared to give? And if you were the one asked to leave, would you walk away quietly? Or would you try one last time to protect the hearts that learn to rely on you? The story closes, but its questions stay. What do we owe to the people who quietly sustain us? And when the moment comes to choose between what is comfortable and what is right, which path would you take?